Snipers, you have to see what's happening to the Bitcoin price this Saturday. I just got on-chain analytics showing over $1.5 billion of Bitcoin leaving exchanges today. I think a lot of that came from Coinbase, and this is extremely positive because it lets the pressure off of the order books, and the likelihood of an upside scenario becomes higher and higher with algos coming into the favor of seeing upside with less supply on exchanges. So I had to get on the charts today, Snipers, because we're going to look at the macro timeframes, the weekly chart, as it is the weekend, so the traditional markets are closed. We don't have to get too far into the four-dimensional revolving parts. We're going to focus on Bitcoin today, but I do want to talk about the 50-week, 200-week, and 100-week moving average, not just for Bitcoin, but for the S&P 500 and other major assets because of this macro perspective we're going to go into. But for now, as always here on the Snipers channel, we're going to discuss the micro timeframes, the immediate short term, just like we predicted yesterday. Bitcoin right now moving sideways, seeing a consolidation inside of the range with a resistance of 41,950, a support of 38,200. But I talked about this ascending support level yesterday that is holding Bitcoin right now on the line chart specifically. We have not breached this extremely important support level, and it puts us inside of this ascending triangle pattern where we still have a little bit of ways to go before we need to break out of this. We could still see some sideways price action here, but at some point or another, the question is, are we going to break out of this ascending triangle or not? Well, right now, the first thing we have to realize, Snipers, for this Saturday update is Bitcoin is fully below the 50-day moving average. I hope that changes by the time I post this video. Smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm if you want that to change, or if it already changed when I post this video. 50-day moving average sitting at 39,800 right now, with today's candle high at 39,327 US dollars. We want to see Bitcoin glue itself back to this 50-day moving average if we don't want to assume that 38,200, which is the ascending triangle support level, is going to break. And if it does break, as long as the S&P 500 does not breach its recent consolidation lows, we also know Bitcoin has a lot of volume at 36,500, even 34,788. It could come to that level and still just form a higher low, which would be a garden variety retest of support and still a bullish pattern. And so if we see this break here at 38,200, I only expect 36,500 or even 34,788 as a max downside scenario, just because of the fact that S&P 500 is yet to breach its recent consolidation lows, as we've been monitoring here on the Snipers channel. And what I mean by that is on this candle here from the 24th of February is where the S&P 500 had a low of 4101.75, and we've yet to come and breach this low. And so as long as we don't, I don't think Bitcoin can come below 34,788. Now, if this happens, that's something that we'll have to talk about. And this is actually a good segue into the weekly chart. And so I want to talk about what's happening here. And so just remember, with Bitcoin right now, we need to get to 39,800, reconquer and glue ourselves back to that 50-day moving average so we can come into Sunday strong. And then, of course, 41,950 is the major resistance. Until we can break above that, we're not going to be looking at too many upside targets. We're just assuming sideways price action until we get more decisive indicators from traditional markets. But a lot of people right now are a little bit on the fence of whether they want to come into Bitcoin or not, because they're all expecting maybe another push to the downside, possibly towards this 200-week moving average, sitting right around the $20,000 to $21,000 level. It's going to continue to rise up as time passes by. But what I think we have to realize here as a four-dimensional channel is the fact that the S&P 500 right now has yet to come towards its 200-week moving average or even test its 100-week moving average. And it's almost as if everyone right now is expecting what happened in December of 2018, where the S&P 500 did come and test its 200-week moving average, to happen again. And if that were to happen, the only 3 times that has happened in the last 4 years is when we saw it in 2018, when we saw it in 2020, and if we were to come to this 200-week moving average again, it would be a 3rd time over the last 4 years. But I don't think it's bad for people to have this position and this opinion that we're going to come to this 200-week moving average, because if we look at Japan, the largest international market, it only came down to this 200-week moving average in 2018, in 2020, and guess what? It already came down to it right now. So if we were to just say this is a leading indicator for the S&P 500, I totally get why people think this is going to happen. And what's interesting about this whole scenario is that if we look at what happened in December of 2018 to the S&P 500, it was really in July of 2018 that things started to break down and slow down before we saw the final move to the downside. And what's very interesting about that is Bitcoin dominance right now is coming up towards this 50-week moving average right now. And if it comes and moves above this 50-week moving average, it's closer to the 50-week than it's ever been, then it would also go in line with what happened in July of 2018, where Bitcoin dominance initially moved above its 50-week moving average. And that could garner that scenario where we see Bitcoin make that final capitulation move. Because notice here how what happened in July of 2018 when all of this was going on with traditional markets and Bitcoin dominance. Well, Bitcoin was in a very tight consolidation range, and it stayed in that consolidation range until December of 2018, where the S&P 500 came down to that 200-week moving average. We saw that final capitulation move for Bitcoin. It brought it down to the $4,000 to $3,200 range, and that was a very strong accumulation zone where we've never seen prices get down to that level since then. Even during the March of 2020 dip, despite the S&P 500 dipping below where it came down to in July of 2018, Bitcoin did not decide to go lower than 5,000 US dollars, where in 2018 it went down to 3,000. And so obviously Bitcoin has been the stronger asset, not just over the last few months, but for years and years and years, Bitcoin has stayed strong against traditional equity markets. And so is everyone expecting a move like this right now? Is that why we're seeing the chatter down in social media about Bitcoin, and we're seeing a lot less interest, let's say, in the markets? I think that there's certainly a possibility we could see that final capitulation move, but it's quite clear that the same thing that happened in July of 2018, where Bitcoin was resistant to downside, just forming higher lows, is currently playing part right now, which means that Bitcoin is still a bullish asset. It's being resistant more than ever to lower prices. And we saw that clearly with our monthly candle analysis. S&P 500 breached its January monthly candle lows with February's monthly candle, but Bitcoin didn't. And so it's clearly a downside resistant asset, I guess we could say, a storage of value right now in this range. Could we say that there's a case, if the S&P 500 comes to its 200-week moving average, follows Japan, that Bitcoin might have a final capitulation move maybe towards its 200-week moving average? I think it's on the table. I think it's fair to put that on the table. And notice how so far, with where current price is from our all-time high at 69,000, is about, let's say, a 45% downside for Bitcoin. And if we come down to that 200-week moving average, we're talking about another 40 to 45%. So it's another similar downside move to what we have here. And is that on the table? I think it could be on the table, but I don't think it'd be on the table in the next month or so. I think it's going to take some time. Even if the S&P 500 comes down, I think that S&P 500 would also take a few months before it could see that 200-week moving average come on the table. But I don't think it's a bad thing for people to have the opinion that it could happen because of what's happening to some other assets like ARK Innovation ETF, the top performing stock ETF in equity markets of 2020, back way below its 200-week moving average. And it's across the table there, not just for ARK, but we look at PayPal right now, way in below the 200-week moving average, even Meta, Facebook, below this 200-week moving average. So is that scenario on the table? Is it likely that the S&P 500 could also follow this move, causing Bitcoin to have that final capitulation? I am not so against people having that thesis, but what I will say is that we don't know how long you might need to wait until we see that move to the 200-week moving average, and you could be waiting for a while because we know Bitcoin has been quite bullish here over the last few months into the last few years, and at any point, maybe we don't see that capitulation move to the downside, and instead we can see that move back to the upside, and now you're not going to get the opportunity to garner lower prices and entries for Bitcoin. And so I think that it's important right now more than ever to monitor the micro timeframes, but it's certainly a scenario on the table with Bitcoin being below the 50-week and the 20-week moving average. I think that it's important to keep that downside scenario as a potential scenario on the on the table. But what I will say is a lot of this has to do with what happens to the DXY, and typically what we'll see is the DXY will come up, hit a major resistance, and then we go into a bull market for Bitcoin, right? It happened in 2017, it happened in 2020. DXY came to a major resistance, and then Bitcoin started its bull rally. And right now we're seeing a pretty overextended DXY, where so far the DXY in max fear during 2020 failed to form a higher high, telling me that there's very little chance that we're going to see the DXY push up to form a higher high. And if that's the case, that we're going to be hitting resistance here very soon for this DXY. And it's very clear on the charts as well that this is an area of resistance. In the past, we've seen the DXY push down along this area that we're currently testing. And so if we're assuming the DXY is going to find resistance soon because it wants to just form another lower high, it's going to come sooner than later. And when that happens, it's going to be the bottom for Bitcoin and maybe even the S&P 500. And so I think we have to be careful right now as to not be too greedy, because you could also be greedy asking for too low of a price. It's not just when prices are going up that greed can come in. We can see greed, as I've talked about before, with people saying, okay, I want better prices and better prices and better prices, until you don't get those prices that you want. And so we have to assume that at some point the DXY is ready to form this lower high, as it did in 2020 and as it started in 2017 and 18. And both of those caused a very strong bull market for the cryptocurrency market. So I think that right there is a great puzzle piece that's on the table for us. The fact that DXY is starting to approach a resistance area. And so I think that at some point or another, we're going to see that. And with that being said, we have to also realize that if Bitcoin does move sideways inside of this consolidation that it's currently in, before it comes to this 200-week moving average, that every time we see downside moves in the sideways price action, it could affect altcoins negatively if we're not seeing strength with the Ethereum to Bitcoin chart. Where the Ethereum to Bitcoin chart, you can see right now 65,000 Satoshis, clearly an important level. We also have the 50-week moving average there. We don't want to breach below it. What preferably would happen is that we bounce here, and that says that altcoins still have potential of seeing upside, like Terra saw new all-time highs 4 days ago when Bitcoin tested 41,950. If we want that continuation of that type of trend for other altcoins like Matic and Sand and Axie and all of these great fundamentally sound projects, then we want to see that the Ethereum to Bitcoin chart maintain 65,000 Satoshis, which is why we're monitoring this right now. Because if we break down from here, then we have to be a little bit more cautious with altcoins into this next season where Bitcoin potentially could move to the side. But I would say that it's hard to say that we're going to be seeing downside just yet until we get confirmation from other revolving parts like the S&P 500 that we're going to see some more weakness. I think that we have to keep that off the table. Now, I will just be the umpire here and not have a just bullish perspective and say that S&P 500 did close with a bearish continuation candle on Friday. And so we have to monitor what happens on Monday, because you can see not only is this a bearish continuation, this is like a rocket pointed down right now with the body of this candle and a very strong wick looking like it wants to come down. What we're going to be monitoring is this consolidation low. As long as we don't breach it, then I think that Bitcoin's likely to come below 34,708 is low. If we do breach this, now we have to talk about what could potentially happen to Bitcoin. And just realize the reason 34,788 is so important for Bitcoin right now is because if we open that door, it opens up a very large downside scenario, because we're breaching macro structural support. You can see with this blue line here that held us in July, it held us now. And if we breach below 34,708, now we open the door to 25,880, and we breach all of these major support levels. And now we potentially could see Bitcoin finally bottom out inside of this range, where I don't think it'll come below its previous all-time high of 19,798 for the Binance spot price. I think that that's very unlikely for Bitcoin, and especially now with the 200-week moving average above this previous all-time high, it strengthens that potential thesis that we cannot see price action get below that, even during a worst-case scenario. And especially with Bitcoin stronger than S&P 500, if the S&P 500 comes to that 200-week moving average, Bitcoin does the same thing, and then we see continuation. That's on the table, but don't bet on it. Don't wait on it. It could not happen, and we could just see continuation upside because markets love to do the complete opposite of what traders expect. So I hope you guys enjoyed this more macro analysis. I know it was exciting to see $1.5 billion of Bitcoin leave exchanges. That's a very positive number. I haven't seen $1 billion+ on these on-chain exchange flows on a daily basis in a while. And so for that to be Bitcoin leaving exchanges is a very positive thing. And so with that, we'll continue to monitor the price. Smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm if you support this Saturday update. And I appreciate each and every one of you snipers tuned into the channel here at youtube.com/snipers. I think that's all I wanted to discuss today. Exactly as predicted right now, we're inside of the range with a major support of 38,000 and a major resistance of 41,950. It doesn't look like Bitcoin wants to see any lower prices below 38,200 until the S&P 500 opens back up. If the S&P 500 breaches its recent consolidation lows, then could we put a downside scenario on the table? But until and if that happens, we want to stay in the mindset that Bitcoin is inside of an ascending triangle where it has room up until the end of this month to break out of this before reaching even close to the apex of this triangle. And at that point, we will monitor and see what the upside targets will be. But first, we have to get above 41,950. It's the major resistance for Bitcoin. And with that, hope you enjoyed today's quick analysis. If you like these computer updates, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about the differences between the phone updates and the computer updates. And I'll see you guys next time. Snipers out.